Adam Creighton is an absolute rock star of Aussie journalism, a great straight shooter, and there's no better way to introduce our mate in Washington, D.C., because there's plenty to talk about the Biden agenda and about those massive spending bills. He joins us now from beautiful D.C. Great man, nice to see you again.
Good evening, Paul.
Now, we know that Bernie wanted $10 trillion, then there was about $3 trillion, and maybe about $1.5 trillion would be enough to get Joe Manchin over the line. Who knows about the Arizona senator? But of course, that's a long way from where they started, but it feels like Biden now will just take anything as a win. But of course, it's a fraction of the agenda that he wants.
Yeah, look, that's exactly right, Paul. This is the incredible shrinking bill, if you like. I mean, in the space of 2 weeks, it's gone from $3.5 trillion mooted to now somewhere between $1.5 trillion and $2 trillion. The bill is dubbed the Build Back Better bill, but really it's turning out to be more of just a renovation, I think, at this stage. As you point out, there's those two senators, which the votes of whom the Democratic Party needs, because as you know, they barely have any majority in the Congress. It's 50-50 in the Senate, and even in the House, the 435-seat House, they only have a 3-seat majority. So the original ambitions of the bill, which relate to paternity leave, to climate change, tax increases, free university, the ambitions were really so out of proportion to the majority in the Congress that I think this is why it's unravelling.
Now, again, I mean, the electoral imperatives and the joy. Look, I love the complexity of the American system, but the absurdity of it too is worth noting too, right? Where essentially, even when you win a presidential election, obviously you don't take over till January, but then there's these little off-year elections that are the litmus test of where you might end up in the midterm elections, which then reset everything for another 12 months before everyone starts getting ready to run for president again, which means basically you kind of got 2 in every 4 years to get something done. And the window to get things done is, of course, dependent on your ability to pass a bill through both houses. And I just think that Biden might be able to sell it as a success, but independent voters, the ones who actually got him over the line, support for Biden has halved among those people. And it's not just about things like this bill. It's not just about Afghanistan. But I want to go back to your old economics brief, right? Inflation, hyperinflation, prices going through the roof. Even Jack Dorsey, the bloke who runs Twitter, is saying this is a problem, which means he can have whatever signing ceremony he wants in the Rose Garden. The reality for people in the streets of every state in the country is they're paying more for what they used to pay less for.
Yeah, certainly. This is the big political issue over here now, I would say. It's, it's not the size of the reconciliation bill. It's very much an inside the beltway issue. But, you've got annual inflation in the US is now running more than 5%, and it's been like that pretty much for most of the year, despite the fact the Federal Reserve and most economists keep saying it's temporary. Well, it's only temporary if you say temporary is 6 months. I mean, there's pockets of chronic inflation emerging, for basic foods, certainly for energy. There's fear of a huge energy price spike this coming winter in the Northern Hemisphere because of shortages of supply. Partly because of government policy on climate change. That's a whole other issue. But yeah, it's been a terrible few months for the Democrats. As you say, Biden's popularity has been sinking steadily, and he really needs this win before he heads out to Glasgow next week. I mean, he's promised to slash emissions here by 50% by 2030, but he doesn't have the legal machinery whatsoever to do that. I mean, as you say, it's very hard to get things done in the US because of the way the Constitution is set up. That's of course by design, but nevertheless, when you've got governments like the Biden government wanting to do grand things, you need grand legislation to go with it, and there's less and less chance that it's going to be passed.
Well, also, what I don't understand, again, because they thought, and I think that you can see this from the events at the start of the year through to now, right, which is that they think now is their opportunity, their Overton window, to shove everything into the wish list and do it all at once. Now, obviously, Democrats like to say all of the things that are in the bill are very individually popular. Well, if that's the case, then every week they should split it up and pass that bill and that bill and that bill and that bill. Instead, they're trying to do it all at once and put a sort of pretty title on the top of it. And basically, if you're against it, how can you be against building back better?
Yeah, look, that's exactly right. I mean, I think it's partly the time issue that you mentioned earlier, that they really only have 1 year left until the midterms next year. But this is a fundamental problem with the bill. You've got so many major pieces of legislation, if you like, within it that have received barely any analysis whatsoever. I mean, there's just this obsession with the top line spending figure, and very little analysis of what, for instance, free community college would mean, or what free childcare would mean for the labour market, or the cost of these things. I mean, the US budget deficit is absolutely enormous. I mean, it's pretty much the size of the entire Australian economy is the deficit each year. So it's perfectly reasonable for these senators to say, look, expanding Medicare and Medicaid, we can't afford it. And they're right. I mean, at some point, something's going to give. Either taxes are going to have to go up massively, or there's going to have to be spending cuts.
Well, also, again, for all of the things that they talk about the inevitable popularity of those things that you've said, the chief way they're going to pay for it is a 7% increase in company tax. So all of those employers, a 7% increase, which of course makes them not as competitive around the world, all the rest of it, right? But it is a fascinating time to be in the United States because, again, this 2 years for every 4 years, and all of the consequences of it. Honestly, I think in terms of political strategy, an absolute waste of a mandate, if there was one, to try and do it all at once, as opposed to just looking like you're changing the joint week by week by week by week. But they went for the big headline, and they're going to pay a price for it in a political sense. Adam, nice to talk to you. We'll keep reading you in the Oz.